I believe that career colleges are uniquely placed in that way because they often attract students that are repurposing their career or they've never gone to college. They want to fulfill a lifelong dream. And oftentimes it's career colleges that offer that opportunity.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host, and I am joined by, for the first time, a colleague that I work with today, someone that I interact with every day and has made a huge impact at the National Association of Career Colleges since she joined us. She's an author, a teacher, a student, I think calls herself a lifelong student, a horse lover. But most interestingly to me is not the day job, it's some of the books that she's written, and we're going to talk about that today. So with that, we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to introduce the Director of Education Development at the National Association of Career Colleges, Dr. Doris Jeanne MacKinnon. Welcome, Doris.
Thank you, Michael. So happy to be here with you.
Always reminded, Dr. MacKinnon. We had a great meeting with one of our colleges, and he kept reminding me to call you Dr. MacKinnon and use the proper title. So that was fun. Let's jump right in. You're in the education center. So looking at this podcast, you're in that sector. Looking at today's podcast, what and the way we try and educate people around career education and the opportunities, what would be a good way that you would articulate a learning outcome for this episode?
So that one was easy. I thought, because we're going to talk about my book and we're going to talk about, what I do at National Association of Career Colleges, discover where a passion for education can lead you. And that's not really an action word like we should with formal learning outcomes. So I would say understand where a passion for education can lead you.
Jump right in here on what are learning outcomes? We know what they are, but the average listener might not have a good idea why they are, what they are, and why they're important.
Yeah, so learning outcomes are statements of what a learner is expected to know, understand, and or be able to demonstrate after completing the process of learning. And so every aspect of teaching should be designed with outcomes in mind. And so we want a student to have a clear idea of the outcomes of the skill set that they will gain with a particular course or program.
And that really is the beauty of the career college sector. You come in, you learn, you get back to work. You get an outcome out of what the training program should be when it's done properly. Wouldn't that be a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. Yeah. You want students to know where they're headed. So that's where the outcome is.
So you could have worked anywhere. You could have worked in higher education and universities, colleges. You've been a dean of academics, actually, at a career college. You've worked at a community college, I believe Red Deer College, if I remember correctly. And you also worked at Yorkville University. So what makes you passionate about career college education?
Well, I am a lifelong learner, as you noted when we started, and I have a passion for learning in general. And so when I returned to post-secondary studies as a mature student, I was going to do one degree only, and I ended up doing 4. I love being a student, and I love learning from my students every day. And I believe that career colleges are uniquely placed in that way because they often attract students that are repurposing their career or they've never gone to college. They want to fulfill a lifelong dream. And oftentimes it's career colleges that offer that opportunity for them. So that's why I'm really passionate about career colleges.
So you live in Alberta, the Wild West, I believe just outside of Red Deer, but everybody thinks of the career college sector as being the Wild West. No regulation, no controls, people just doing whatever they want to do. You're just about 2 years into this role with MacK. Do you have some views, some thoughts about the regulatory system that our colleges operate under? And even maybe some thoughts of what might surprise some of our listeners as to how much regulation we actually operate under?
Well, I think a lot of listeners would be surprised at how rigorous the process is. I mean, we work alongside ministries of education in every province to help our programs be approved in every province. And it's a very vigorous process, and it's just as rigorous as a public post-secondary for sure. And, there's oversight with our programs, we have oversight of any member college that's using our programs. We work with a team of auditors and we work alongside them to have their programs approved by ministries and regulators and so on. So that would be something that probably many people aren't aware of is the rigorous process to have programs approved and delivered. It's not just approved, it's the delivery as well, to make sure that we're always meeting the standards that are expected by the regulators and by students and the industry.
And by industry and by associations. And quite often, I'm getting into a bit of an advertisement here, but employers are right in the college working with the instructors and the curriculum developers and hiring those students when they come out the far side, aren't they?
That's right. And we have all of our programs are developed with the assistance of program advisory committees. And those are made of, subject matter experts, but industry themselves to let us know what skill set they're looking for in graduates of these programs.
So career colleges aren't for everybody. University isn't for everybody either. So let's say you're delivering a lecture at Yorkville University and they asked you afterwards, someone walked up and asked you if they should attend a career college. What kind of questions would you ask them to help you figure out if they're a good fit to go to a regulated career college?
So I'd ask them probably what their goals are, number one, what they hope to learn, what are the outcomes they want from that program, what are their learning experiences from the past, what experiences have they had in post-secondary education, and how do they like to learn? Do they like, large class sizes? Do they like that one-on-one work integrated learning? What do they hope to encounter in this learning process?
Okay, let's get into some fun stuff because we're more than the job. And I wanted to have you on the podcast because you've done some really neat things. And I've got a couple of books put aside for the Christmas read. And they're both authored by you, or you're part of the different books that I wanted to get reading with. So we just had a big conference in Toronto, and we had a great opening moment, land acknowledgement, which yourself and James Connery from our team delivered a very personal land acknowledgement. Can we talk to us a little bit about what that was like for you and your own life experiences around reconciliation and Indigenous issues in Canada?
Absolutely. So I can go on for a long time here, Michael, on this topic, but I went to high school and lived for most of my younger life in a small community in northeastern Alberta. And it was the very first Métis settlement. St. Paul de Métis is what it was called originally. It's not called that anymore. But as I was going to school and I was, wondering about the cultures of the area and so on, and I was curious, but I didn't learn a lot about Indigenous peoples, even though there were like 5 Indigenous communities around where I went to school. And so it was only when I went back to university as a mature student and I wanted to know more about my area and the people from my area. And so I focused on Indigenous studies for my master's program. And then I moved on and did more. I could have kept on working, studying that forever. I think it was just, I look back on it as some of the best times of my life are just engaging in that history and meeting people. I was so fortunate to meet Métis families whose stories I could learn and share, walk alongside them. And they were so generous with their stories. And for me, it was kind of a bit of a journey of reconciliation, I guess, because I wanted to understand, there's in these small communities, sometimes there's racism and so on between the groups. And I wanted to understand where the roots of that racism were. I often think of the truth and reconciliation journey that we're on in Canada and how, you can't really reconcile with people unless you know the truth, which is the history. And so that's why it's so important for me to share the stories of. I focused on Métis women because we didn't really know a lot about Métis women when we were studying the history of Canada or even the fur trade. And women didn't often feel that their experiences were worthy of keeping record of. And so I wanted to delve more. I wanted to learn more myself about these stories of resilience. And, the Métis women oftentimes were the ones that were the keepers of the faith or the culture and the history and so on. The faith too, because the Métis often traveled with Roman Catholic missionaries. So they were often the keepers of the faith too, but the history and the culture, and they, extended their networks to make sure that their families survived, because the Métis went through a lot of transition in their history when they kind of were pushed out of their traditional territories and moved further north and west. And so these Métis women were often the nucleus of that community and the survivors.
It's just before the conference we had in Toronto, we lost an icon, a legend in this country, Justice Senator Sinclair, but probably no one did more for reconciliation education in this country through the work he did officially for the government, but also outside of government. I had the pleasure of meeting him on a few occasions, and he managed to open my eyes to things. And I like to think I'm fairly learned and aware, but he opened my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. And I know you spoke highly of him at the conference. It meant a lot to you to take a moment and celebrate him, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah. I heard him speak once publicly, and I was always so taken with him because he was such a humble man. He was raised by two grandparents who were survivors of residential schools. And, he could have become, bitter about that, but he chose a different path. He chose to help educate Canada. He used to say, I want to be your friend. I want you to be mine. That's what reconciliation was all about, is we want to get to know each other and we want to work together and join together to make this a better world for all of us. So yeah, I was very impressed with him, as many people were. He was a giant in the area of reconciliation, and yeah, thought very highly of him.
A remarkable leader, a remarkable communicator, and just a bit of I almost use the gentle giant because he had a presence when he walked in the room, but there was a gentleness to him, and he will be missed. And I often say to friends sitting around chatting, I'm impressed with how far we've actually come in reconciliation, and we're nowhere near done. But the amount of people around the tables I'm sitting at who are so much more aware than we were 5 years ago and 10 years ago, a long ways to go, but it is nice to see us making progress. So with that, I was interested because you touched on it already a little bit. One of the books that you wrote about was about Métis matriarchs. And you touched on a little bit already, but is there anything else you want to add about what we can learn from them and their teachings?
Yeah, and so that book, it was a compilation of like 8 chapters, 8 different women, and when we reached out, we wanted to hear the stories told from family members, and so most of the stories are told by some of them are academics, but they're talking about their family members and how they were the nucleus of that family, and they were the ones that encouraged their descendants to keep learning the culture and keep making sure their identity, they were strong and proud of their identity. And so that project really meant a lot because it gave the opportunity for family members to share the stories of the matriarchs in their families, who were often the negotiators and the traditional knowledge keepers, I guess, and the elders.
So one of the people you've written about extensively is Marie Rose Delorme Smith. And I was intrigued, and what first compelled you to want to tell her story, but then also introduce people to who she was and what she meant to Canada.
Yeah, so Mary Rose Delorme Smith, I first learned about her. Her granddaughter wrote a book called $50 Bride, and it's a loving memoir of her grandmother. And the reason the title is $50 Bride is Mary Rose was traded by her mother to a Robin whiskey trader who was 17 years her senior for $50. And she was 16 and she was pretty frightened, of this new situation. But anyway, she accepted her life's journey, and they ended up settling in the southern Alberta in the Pincher Creek area, had 17 children, and she lived till she was 99. She was an amazing woman. She was a medicine woman. She became a small industry craftsperson. She was a homesteader. They had a ranch called the Jug Handle Ranch, and oftentimes her husband carried on with his nomadic ways, but she was on the ranch and she was managing the ranch and raising the children. And she was an author. She left a lot of manuscripts that her family were wise enough to leave at an archives, the Glenbow Archives in Calgary. So she wanted to have a book published. And of course, you can appreciate in the early 1900s, a Métis woman having a book published would have been a challenge. She was successful in publishing a series of about 12 articles in a Canadian Cattleman, a prairie periodical. And so I delved into those papers, and I was just fascinated with her story, her resilience, her strength. And I met a number of her descendants, and they shared stories and pictures with me. I've known that family now for over 20 years. I've walked alongside them sharing the story of Mary Rose. We managed to nominate her to be recognized by Parks Canada as a person of national historic significance. And in 2022, we were so honored and pleased that happened. So she's now recognized. You can search her online and you can find the write-up on her. They're going to install a plaque, hopefully next summer, in the Pincher Creek area of southern Alberta. So yeah, very, very impressive woman.
That's an incredible story. And it's interesting that how she was an author, 17 children running a ranch and still had time to write.
I know, amazing, isn't it? And her husband died 46 years before she passed away. And so she was a widow for all of those years. And of course, she had a large extended family, as you can appreciate. And so she spent time living with those family members over different times of her life. And yeah, so she had people wrote about her. Actually, I found articles back from when she was alive, inquiring about her upcoming book. They were hoping to read her book. And of course, that never happened. But my goal was to get more and more people to learn her story. As soon as I read it, I was just enthralled with her story. And I thought it was so important that people would learn her story, hoping, to share her story as she would have it shared.
Well, we'll make sure when we release this podcast, we connect alongside to some of those stories to make sure people can find them easily, because it's an important thing to do. And it's what I'd love to see. It'd be interesting if anybody tracked that family tree, the impact, 17 children down, what that's meant in this country. That's incredible. So let me transition a little bit from writing to research, because I'm intrigued we always get down to skills and mentors and some other things in this podcast, because we're trying to let people understand about why people like yourself who've been successful, what are some of the things that have made them successful? So before I get to that, what do you think great researchers and great writers have in common?
I think one word it comes down to is curiosity. We want to know more. We're curious about every person we meet. I always want to learn something about every person I meet, every experience, place, land, and wanting to share it. So you're curious, you want to learn about it. So you're a researcher, but you also want to inspire curiosity in others. You want them to, like when you write a book, I always say this to people, you can write a book today and then somebody will come along and have new stories about what you wrote about. And because my books are a good example. Every time I've talked about my books, I've had somebody come forward and say, oh, I'm a great grandson or whatever, and I'll learn more. So a book is never closed, because you can always write more and learn more. And so you inspire people to become curious with what you write and to want to learn more.
We often follow up to find out about what hones those kind of skills, but I think curiosity is something you either have or you just put your back into. It's not a skill you can hone, but it is crucial for that kind of work. Talk about yourself. What do you think makes you successful? What's the greatest skill that you've got that you either had or learned as your career went on? And it's interesting to get the different answers we get from people on this.
Yeah, well,
Might be curiosity.
it's curiosity, but I think it's humility as well, is because, there's a saying, the more I learn, the less I know, in the sense that, the more you engage with something, the more you realize that there's so much more you can know about that topic, right? There's so much more. And so you're never finished learning. And that's what's so fascinating about being in education, is there's always so much more to learn. And I learn every day from students. I learn every day from everybody that I interact with. So that's very, very fortunate to be in this field.
So talk to me a little bit then about how does MacK and how do career colleges develop curriculum to make sure that the outcomes are there for learners and that they can be, in many cases, retrained to get a restart on their career? What does it look like inside of a college to make sure the right things are happening, whether it's a program we build or it's a program that a college would build on the ground to make sure that somebody can graduate with a great chance of getting a job?
Well, so this is one thing that career colleges do so well, is most of their programming has work integrated learning, practicums, that kind of, there's not just theoretical. They're learning how to do what they want to do with their life every day. And they get out, the day they're done their program, they've already got those skill sets. They're already ready to work. They're jumping right in. In fact, they've already found work sometimes in the practicums that they are placed in, but it's that work integrated learning throughout their programs. And a lot of public post-secondaries are moving to that. But I mean, I could say that career colleges were there first, because they always integrated that.
A little known fact about our sector is that in many cases, you have to prove a job need before you start teaching the program. In some provinces, in some courses, with each new class, you've got to prove there's actually a need for the people graduating, which I think is a unique part about our sector that's not known. And it's interesting because our college owners are investing their own cash. They're not going in with government funding. They get student aid in many cases for the students if they can prove some things, but they've got to take risks and they've got to invest and they've got to build a program knowing an employer's at the far end of it too. So it kind of builds on what you've been saying, doesn't it?
It does. Absolutely. Yeah.
And to me, I find it interesting when I go into colleges, how many times I meet someone who's retired and gone back to teach, to give back, or is still working and maybe they're working in a heavy equipment college or they're working as a nurse, but they're in training students on a day-to-day basis. That goes along with what you're talking about. I do chuckle when people talk about the work integrated learning, because it's what we do. And this has all been an eye-opener for me. You've been working in this sector longer than me. This has been a complete eye-opener for me as to just how close that connection is to business. So we always ask people, we put them on the spot, and I know you're going to say me, but if you don't, that was a joke. We've got a good sense of humor at MacK. We like to have fun. Who's been a great mentor to you, and why? And then the last question on that is, do they know they were?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah. So, I've encountered wonderful people that I've worked with all throughout my career, and you're one of them, Michael. But my mentor, my
Well done, Doris Jeanne.
my mentor, that I met in 2004, and that was because it was so unusual for me to see myself in a master's program at a university. But Dr. Don B. Smith, who hails from Ontario originally, but spent his career at University of Calgary. And the minute that I walked in, and I didn't feel I belonged in the master's program, but the minute I walked in and met him as my supervisor, he made me feel that I belonged, and he believed in me. And he still, to this day, he supervised my master's program. Then I went on to do other programs, but to this day, he still mails me articles. He still sends me, tidbits of things that I should follow up on. He's a consummate supporter. Every time I do something, he emails me and says, I saw this about you. I'm so pleased for you. And you know what? He embodied that curiosity that I talked about earlier. He is a storyteller, and he embodied curiosity. And I always wanted to be just like him in that sense, being able to tell those stories. So.
And do you think he knew? Did you tell him he was a mentor to you, or was it just a special relationship and you think he knows?
I think he knows. I think he knows. We're colleagues now. It's funny because I used to call him doctor all the time, even years after I got my PhD. And he said, Doris Jeanne, he said, I'm not doctor to you, I'm Donald to you. So yeah, I think he knows our friendship. It's become a friendship now, but yeah.
We like to keep it a little loose here too. So tell me a little bit about, because we've been following the path of your latest acquisition. Talk to me a little bit about the horses in your life. Well, the animals in your life, because it's not just horses, is it?
No, it's not just horses. I have dogs, cats, horses. When I was a kid, I had all kinds of pets on the farm. But yeah, and horses, there's a special thing about horses for me anyway. I think that horses, in a sense, they're a reflection of ourselves, in the sense that if I'm confident, my horse is going to be confident. If I'm nervous, my horse is going to be nervous. And it's that relationship where I had one horse that I had for 25 years, and it took me 10 years after he passed to be able to go into another relationship. But I really thought with that horse that because he trusted me, I learned to trust myself. It was a time in my life when I needed that. And he forced me out of my comfort zone. I ended up doing a lot of things with that horse that I didn't expect to do, but I credit that horse and my relationship with that horse in giving me the confidence to challenge myself, to step out of my comfort zones, go back to school as a mature student, become an educator and writer. And I still, think back to that horse. He was a beautiful chestnut American saddlebred. And as I said, it was 10 years before I could move away from that grief, I guess, of losing him. I was with him when he passed, into this new relationship. And I've got now Jeremiah, 2-year-old, beautiful black Frisian horse. And I expect all kinds of new experiences with that.
I have had the dog relationship. I've not had the horse. I like to say I've got an anxiety dog. He causes me anxiety every day. You've been in Teams meetings when he comes running in, but he's good for me. He relaxes me right out. Animals can play a special part in our lives, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're a companion.
Before we sign off, we got a couple of minutes, so I'll put you on the spot. What's the next thing you want to write about? Because it's not about work today. It's about other things too. It's nice to spend a little time talking about what we do here, but do you have a thought of what the next book's going to be or the next story? Because sometimes you're a contributor as well, not just an author to a whole book, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Michael, because I've been thinking I want to veer off into totally different type of writing, and I want to do some creative nonfiction, but I also want to share the stories of how, like for instance, the story I just shared about this horse and what he's meant for me. And it brought me that connection back with my mother because horses were really important to her. And I want to write, I think, some personal essays, just some reflections on experiences, people, animals that I've been blessed to know and to engage with. So it might be something like that. I don't know.
I'm sure that would be of interest to people. I think the story around the connection to that animal and what it meant to you might trigger is not the right word, although it's a good name for a horse years ago, but a connection for people. These animals are important, as we said. So I did want to have you on as a guest. We try and keep these things to just under half an hour so that people will actually listen to us. But there's some important things that you've been doing with our association, but more, you're an intriguing, interesting person doing fun stuff. And I wanted people to have a moment to hear about some of the writings and some of the other work you're doing. So we'll make sure that we post with this episode some of those books and articles and things that you've done. And I'm sure they're all for sale somewhere on Amazon or elsewhere, or your favorite local bookstore. I have to say, I sadly walked by one in downtown Ottawa the other day that I used to go into all the time and realized it's now long gone, a little small bookstore. So I try and always frequent the little ones, but I look forward to picking up your book over the holidays and giving it a read. And do you have anything last that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, it's just something that you just mentioned about bookstores. My publisher always says that if you want to support publishing in Canada, you support those little independent bookstores, because they are the ones that are getting our stories out there. So
we've had back-to-back authors. We had Dr. Axworthy, Lloyd Axworthy, on last week talking about his new book, and I'm actually doing a book launch with him, and we've partnered with a little bookstore to make sure that everybody attending has to walk through the bookstore, buy the book, and then come to the back to get access to the event. And that's exactly what the author Lloyd said to me, is the publisher had said, get those little bookstores. They need our help. And they're little anchors in the community, aren't they?
They are, absolutely.
Very similar to our colleges that are closer to the students, closer to the employers, and give people an opportunity to train. So with that, Dr. MacKinnon, I thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to welcoming you all back on next week's episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts, so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.